Hello, I am Mike Nichols, the Content and Social Media Manager for AEM, and welcome to another episode of our video podcast, Talking with the Experts. Today, we're going to be exploring a few of the challenges involved in coordinating effective interagency responses to fast-developing natural hazards like wildfires, flash floods, even health crises. And on the flip side of that coin, we're going to be looking at how breakdowns in coordination can limit the effectiveness of a response, often to the detriment of those standing in harm's way. So to help us explore these issues, I've actually invited on a very special guest, Mike Chard, who directs the Office of Disaster Management for both the city and county of Boulder, Colorado. So Mike, thank you for being here.
You're welcome, and thanks for asking. Looking forward to having a discussion with you today.
Outstanding. So I should point out Boulder is a longtime customer of AEM's family of brands. That includes One Rain and View and Associates. But that's actually not why we've invited Mike to be here. On the contrary, for the topic we're discussing, we really, and I mean this, we really could not ask for a more qualified person than Mike. He's been directing Boulder's Office of Disaster Management for the past 15 years. And before that, he was managing emergency response as a fire chief and paramedic team lead. Over the course of his career, he's directed emergency operations across numerous incidents. Some highlights include famous wildfires like the Marshall Fire in 2022, the 4 Mile Fire of 2010. He's overseen the response of multiple flood events and tornadoes, not to mention, and yes, Colorado does have tornadoes from time to time. Not to mention mass shooting and the COVID-19 pandemic. What's more, Mike is a nationally recognized thought leader in emergency and disaster management. So in addition to being a sought-after speaker, he served or has continued to serve on each of the following: the International Association of Fire Chiefs Wildfire Evacuation Planning Task Force, the FEMA Emergency Operations Center Working Group, the Homeland Security Advisory Board, the Board of Directors of the National Alliance for Public Safety, GIS Foundation, to name just a few. So, Mike, are you ready to dive into our conversation?
I'm ready to go, Mike, whenever you want to fire, Matt.
Great. So, as I understand it, right, cross-agency collaboration is something that Boulder's taken pretty seriously for a really long time, even before you came on at the office. So maybe you could give us a little bit of background about how that started.
Yeah, for sure. You know, first of all, I think it starts with the culture in the community. I think there's always been a thread of collaboration amongst the many municipalities and special districts and agencies that make up the response, capacity in our county. The emergency managers that have gone before me have also contributed heavily in bringing those groups together and starting to lay the tracks and the groundwork. So, I guess the main point that this is stuff that just doesn't happen overnight. There really has to be a commitment, and a long-standing one, to make it work effectively. And the previous director, prior to my arrival, really put a lot of emphasis on that and did a great job in being able to invite people into that relationship and setting up what we currently see today, which is our Boulder Multi-Agency Coordination System, which we call the MAC Group. And that group really is a reflection, or makes up the composition of our emergency support function, or ESF, capabilities in our EOC when we activate. And whenever we have a disaster, I'm able to lean heavily into that organization. And any problem that we have, there's pretty much a group of people with a capability that can surge quickly when the EOC activates through that management structure, and then apply those capabilities into the disaster theater and either provide response, directly, or even be in a more support coordination aspect of it and carry it all the way through into recovery.
Wow, that's great. I think it's fair to say, though, that there are a lot of communities out there that at least pay some sort of lip service to the idea of interagency collaboration.
Right.
But it's also, a pretty small percentage that really get behind it the way Boulder has. So why do you think that is? What is it that makes Boulder different here?
I think, like I kind of said already, right? I think that you look at that collaborative environment, across the entire county amongst all the different, political subdivisions of government. I'm not saying there's not differences and there's not competition to some level, but also the thing that I think differentiates us when you have disasters, and we've had our fair share over the many years, uh, that it makes you realize that these disasters are crossing jurisdictional boundaries. You're going to have to share authority. You're going to have to, lash the boats together to really, hold your community together. And, you're leaning on unaffected communities to be able to provide critical support services and resources at your time of need. And everyone kind of sees that could be me that needs that help someday. So I think there's this willingness and this culture around when, we're hit and we're knocked down, and you got to push all your chips to the center of the table. You've got a lot of people behind you that are going to make sure that it's going to come out okay. So it's that kind of piece that's there. And if every community doesn't have disasters or have that ethos around cooperation and other aspects of whatever it may be regionally within their community, it's hard to generate that at the time of a disaster. So it's not something you can just mix together in the moment and think it's going to work. It really takes many years to really mature it, and has to really have strong political leadership support to make sure that stays an emphasis within the community and with all the departments that make up those capabilities that we use during disasters.
Are there any scenarios or previous examples where that you've learned from, where you said, okay, this is a perfect example of why we need to improve collaboration here, or this is an example of where we need to improve collaboration there, just to try to bring it down to a more tangible, concrete level for some of our listeners?
Sure. One great example, I think, that highlights it. A lot of our disasters have occurred up in the mountains and in unincorporated areas. So especially in wildfire type events. And when you have that happen, people get really comfortable with escalating the response. By that meaning you're transferring responsibility, and really it's not really transfer, but you're inviting more people into your problem, and then you're sharing the authority. It also brings resources where it may be exceeding a fire district's ability. They're transferring that to the sheriff. That brings county funds, and then we take it to the state. So it kind of rolls up even to the federal system. So that's the way. But when you shift that model and you bring it then into a more urban environment where they're not as comfortable with what we would call a delegation of authority, the collaboration falls apart pretty fast. They're willing to help out, but now you're turning the table a bit and saying, hey, we're going to come in, like in the Marshall Fire, you have communities now that are being impacted by wildfire, and they're not as comfortable with those delegations of authority, as they're called, which is kind of a bad term. It's really just delegation of responsibilities, but it's uncomfortable. And then that puts a strain on the relationship, and the capability, or that coordination piece starts to fall a little bit. So you have to kind of build that in the moment, and that becomes a challenge, especially when you're in the middle of a disaster. So that's an example of what we saw in the after action. Was we hadn't spent the time with our policy groups on the plains with the municipalities there to make them feel very comfortable with what was going to be asked of them in a time of an emergency or disaster. So we definitely highlighted that in our after action work. And so we got to go to work on really making sure that people are comfortable in these multi-jurisdictional shared authority environments, and that they can move between the asks very easily, as opposed to having to, recoil a bit and go, wait a minute, I don't know what that means. I need to be a little more cautious now, which then of course drives down your coordination, and that can create some delays and some challenges when you're looking to stay in that agile, rapidly adjusting space. That can then pull that down a bit. And then, after you get it back and going, now you're behind the eight ball a little bit. Now you got to play some catch up because you lost some coordination capacity. So it really highlights the importance of having the agreements, the understandings, the policy group, the strategic operational elements to the tactical elements all align, so that you don't lose that coordination. Because in these large disasters, that the command and control world does a great job. But as things get bigger and crosses lines and is going to go multiple operational periods, that coordination piece is kind of coming up and elevating with that command and control space. Without those two, you're going to lose the fight in these large scale disasters, because they're just so large. They require both those elements to be in concert with one another.
All right, Mike, those are some great thoughts, especially at a policy level, jurisdictional level. Those are really great insights. What if you were to take this down to more of an operational level? What would you say about achieving that coordination at the operational level?
At the operational level, I seeing two things that kind of jump to mind on that. And as an operator that you're interacting in that operational space, one thing that's different is sort of the differences around how disasters develop. So for example, taking a hurricane, that's kind of a pre-notice event to some extent. You know where it's coming, you see it develop, you have trajectory, you have days to kind of prepare, engage, get the coordination structures all set up. In the environment we're living with here in Boulder, especially like City of Boulder and many of the unincorporated areas that have canyons like flash flooding, the wildfire events that are wind driven. These are very fast temporal scale type of events that will come screaming up. You know, you'll see a storm form or the wind set, and then the fire happens, and it just escalates, puts a lot of complexity, a lot of escalation on you, and then you're having to make a lot of decisions. But you're also then having to put in a lot of consequence management in there, meaning shelters, evacuations, road closures, all those things, and being able to coordinate that very fast is paramount in that operational space, because it's stressing the command and control structures immediately. So the ability to surge more resources, coordinate with state regional partners, get resources to come back, support them, coordinate broader into that consequence management space to bring up sheltering capabilities. All that has to happen on a scale that's quite a bit different than that hurricane scale. So being able to make sure that your operational coordination structures are moving at that pace is important. The second piece around that is when you're in that space, then, because it is moving so quickly, you got to get away from the jurisdictional, I have the authority, and working on that ahead of time, which we've done since the Marshall Fire in that after action improvement process, was being able to say operational folks need to make decisions fast. So you kind of take the question of jurisdictional coordination out of the element to some degree around those operational decisions, because you don't need to coordinate with someone to make a decision or get a permission. You just go ahead and do it, and then you're notifying. And then as you kind of get down the road, maybe beyond initial response into either sort of outside of initial attack phase, you're starting to build the coordination structures around that rapid temporal development escalation environment, and the coordination structures just reinforce based around that jurisdictional boundary drop environment, to where now you can get the policy level people engaged and informed and briefed, and they're able to make those longer term, heavier, larger decisions and feel comfortable about it. And that's been really helpful in the disaster environments we encounter here in Boulder County.
Great. Those are some great examples, Mike. I appreciate it. They definitely show how, cross-agency collaboration is impacting Boulder's ability to respond effectively. Hopefully they'll also spur some good ideas for some of our other communities. Any final thoughts that, if you were to cap off what we've been talking about, any final thoughts you'd want to leave our viewers with?
I think that we're really highlighting the point of coordination, and I think one of the things that is important that I've learned over the years is that each type of hazard has a different set of coordination needs. And by that, what I'm saying is don't think that the one group you use for this hazard will be the same group for the next. And when I've dealt with things from like a flood, there's a different group in that as there is with wildfire. And then from going from that then to a mass shooting of an incident, the coordination needs were diametrically different in each one of those hazard spaces. So don't build just a coordination system like a monolithic one size fits all. Critically look at what that is, and then have a good understanding yourself of what that means. Because coordination to me is more than a word, it's a capability. So whoever is the person responsible for that, I think having the competency in that space is important. So what's your experience in dealing with coordination? Do you have the right skill set to execute coordination? Do you have the right attitude and the right knowledge? And if you have all that and kind of think that through and highlight what it is in each one of those spheres around it, you can be competent in the coordination space and be effective in building those coordination structures for multiple hazards and multiple levels of hazard within your community.
Thanks, Mike. That's some great advice. Before we wrap up, I should also point out, since we are talking about interagency coordination and strategies for making that happen, I should mention a brand new application that AEM just launched at the Meteorological Technology World Expo. That's called AEM Elements 360. And the major driver behind the development of that application was to break down some of the various silos in different communities that tend to get in the way of effective collaboration. So for example, like relying on fragmented data scattered across multiple software interfaces. This application is actually designed to integrate data from various in-house networks, AEM's proprietary networks, and almost any other environmental data source you might need to deliver one consolidated source of truth that can enable a breakthrough level collaboration and information sharing across all the different stakeholders. So for our viewers, if you visit our website, you can actually sign up for a live demonstration of AEM Elements 360 and see that in action. That event will be taking place on November 2nd. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up our conversation. So Mike, once again, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome, Mike.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope our conversation helped you pick up some new ideas that might help you improve your interagency coordination in your community or organization. And until next time, this is Mike Nichols for AEM and for Talking with the Experts.